Why tracking isn't the full story. I want to walk you through what are the key things that we'd suggest that you track for a period of time, and then more importantly, what's the next phase to that? Because I think if you just focus on tracking everything all of the time, you probably feel like you're in a bit of a diet prison or not feeling like you can really live life. And I think there's a real attitude component of this that we want to address as well. So we're going to dive in. Mandy, I guess one of the big things that we talk about with clients is or even more importantly, how we stage what we track at different periods, right? So, for example, we're not going to go into full blown macro tracking or even a full sleep study. We're probably going to start with something a little bit more awareness based, like some photos of meals or building in some rhythm to their morning routine where otherwise their day was kind of steamrolled by everyone else. But if you were looking at a theme, whether you were working with someone in the first 3 months of the program or 6, 12 months down the line, what do you think is the biggest roadblock personally when you ask someone to track something, whether it be step, sleep, or nutrition? What gets in their way?
I think for a lot of people at the start, when it comes to tracking, there's two parts to it actually. The first part is actually the time. So it's a new habit that they have to build, and it's easy to make excuses that I don't have time to do that, or I don't want to, or I don't want to be seen to be taking photos of my meals, or I eat my meal and forget to take a photo. So it's that aspect of just building the habit around it and actually making time to do it because it is important for your goals. But the second part of it is maybe around their own judgment of themselves and what comes through in that tracking, because there's a certain amount of I guess there's a certain level of confrontation when you start tracking your meals. And we know this, right? In that if we ask someone to track their meals with photos, very often there'll be a weight loss that occurs, there'll be some learning that occurs if they're open to the tracking. We didn't even tell them to do anything. All we asked them to do was take photos of their meals. And suddenly they're like, oh, I didn't realize how often I'm just grabbing a handful of nuts that I didn't realize I was doing, or how often I'm doing, adding this extra thing that I didn't need. And so a big part of the tracking initially is actually, it's nothing to do with judgment. It's nothing to do with about putting rules on yourself, but it's actually just about developing your own awareness to the things that you're mindlessly doing. And I love it if people can break through that layer. But I think that, yeah, the two roadblocks are probably one, people think they don't have time, but if it's important to you, you do have time. And two, um, knowing that it might be a bit confronting, but that's part of the journey as well. And that's actually okay.
Yeah, I think we mentioned this probably 6 or so episodes ago now, but that awareness of standing on the scales, you're measuring two things. One, you're measuring how much you weigh, right, in relation to gravity, and the other one, you're measuring how you talk to yourself about what that number means, right? And I think there's so many weird additional emotional or just kind of logical steps that we'll throw on top of what a number means, right? And how that makes us feel, or how we judge ourselves based on a certain number, and that can come up in all sorts of different ways. But being able to just let that number be a metric to which is showing where you're at today and how close on, how on track you are or what needs to be changed does allow you to just look at that number for what it is. And I 100% realize that's so much easier to say rather than to do, but it's just being mindful of it doesn't get better by avoiding it. Like if you track your weight on a once a week level and allow it to be a metric of how did the last week go, and don't follow it up with saying, you're failing or that it's a waste of time or whatever it might be. It's just like interesting data, moving on. It just gives you one more metric. And I do think that the time frame of that stuff is quite important, meaning there's volatility to everything if you look at it over too short a time horizon, right? You're going to see the stock market is really volatile day to day, but over months to months, you kind of got an overall concept of where it's going. If you look at your bank account, it's maybe volatile day to day, but you're noticing there's a general trend over the weeks or months. So I think looking at scale weight, for example, is a really nice reminder that you may notice that there's quite a difference in your weight from Sunday to Wednesday, depending on stresses, sleep patterns, travel, etc. But if you track it just every Wednesday, you'll get a much better metric of, okay, generally week to week, this is my trend. So I think that's the first part. But as you mentioned, the second one here is, and it came up just in the squad calls we were on recently, being our workshop trainings around something like mindfulness, right? Where if we want to pause more often during the day, we want to go for a walk. It's all these things that logically we're like, yeah, we want to do more of that. And then we start the day, we get lost in the blur of stuff we need to do. And next thing we know, it's 6 p.m. and we haven't walked again, right? So that ability to bring awareness to, as you mentioned, kind of taking a photo of a meal is a really nice way to just bring the reminder back up more often. And I don't know about you, but I've seen so many photos where it's like a half-eaten meal. So, oh yeah, I've got to take a photo of this thing. So, because you're actually just trying to get into the habit of like, oh yes, I need to take a photo of this thing.
Mhm.
Um, and I think there's a relationship with that, that just the 5 deep breaths before a meal isn't hard. It's just remembering to do it, or
Yeah.
taking the photo, etc.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I get pictures of tables and dogs and all sorts of things. And it's kind of cool though, because the person's caught themselves. Like behavior change happens in stages. The first part is becoming aware of the behavior because you can't change it if you're not aware of it.
Hmm.
And the second part is catching you. And sometimes that awareness doesn't happen till after you've done the thing.
Yep.
But if you catch yourself then, at least you're ahead of the game of the fact that you once upon a time you didn't even know that that was happening at all. So if you are, oh damn it, I forgot to take a picture of my meal again. Here's a picture of the table.
Yeah.
You're a step ahead of having not taken the picture.
Yeah. 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 The whole, I've been bloated for 20 years, don't know where it's coming from, to, hey, I've eaten that thing 3 days in a row and I get bloated after it every time. I've done it in, after the fact, but at least it's entered my consciousness
Yes.
rather than just not being able to link the two together.
Yeah, yeah. And I think this is
Mm.
the thing that especially in the first part of Body Reset, when we ask people to track with photos, that's the part that I love. And especially when people lean into it, is there's no judgment at this point. We're not looking at your food and being like, yeah, eating this and you're eating that and all that. It's more, cool, how are you feeling? How does that
Yep.
feel? How does that line up with what we're trying to do here, or these sorts of things? It's purely about awareness development for the individual. It's not about judgment or restriction or rules or anything like that. It's just let's shine a light over what's actually happening here and get honest with ourselves.
Yeah.
Um, and then we can make changes from there.
It's quite funny, isn't it? Because, you and I see many variations of this, but a lot of people want to fast track it to get to the perfect plan straight away. And as we both know, that doesn't exist. But getting to a place where you're better off than where you are currently. Yet sometimes saying, "Look, I want you to take a photo of everything, whether it be the chicken salad or the Mora bar or anything in between. Just take a photo of it," and then asking that question, "How do you feel?"
Mm.
can go through a self-auditing process of finding foods you feel better on, which in the long run is actually a more valuable process of like, I'm eating these foods based on what I feel good on, not based on a plan that was given to me and I didn't question further. Right. And I think that's where that self experimentation aspect, and I think there's probably a mix in between that's a good balance, which we typically use, but being able to have and keep that intuition aspect or just the awareness of how I felt on the meal can't be missed.
I just had this conversation in squads actually, where we do use macro tracking and whatnot down the line, but I don't like people to do that first up because it can actually blunt, I guess, your awareness of the thing because you're just following the plan. So
Yep.
the point is that weight loss is a formula, right? Any person out there on the internet can give you a plan that will help you lose weight, basically, because it is a formula. But that's not very clever because if it's taking away all your own intuition, all your own connection to how your body feels with something, you're not learning anything. You're just following a set plan. The learning happens in actually, how does this food make me feel?
Mm.
If I eat this, do I have better energy in the afternoon? Could I do this in the long term? Because the real learning when it comes to health and especially weight loss is not how to lose the weight, but how to maintain what you have lost. And that comes from understanding how food works with you. And I think this is why for me as a holistic nutritionist, a lot of nutritionists have actually railed against tracking and kind of gone the other way, that it's all, mindfulness and stuff like that, where I actually lean quite heavily on tracking. But I lean heavily on tracking because of the education that it can give the individual who does the tracking to how it works for them. And starting with pictures is one thing, and then we can go layers deeper, layers deeper, layers deeper on that as much as
Yeah.
we need so the person understands it.
Yeah, and it's so funny that you can say that it's all mindfulness or it's all tracking because what you've highlighted, it's actually very much both.
It is.
One without the other is completely useless. You can focus on feeling good all the time, but if your weight's continuing to go up, like it doesn't even matter if all the food's healthy, you are going to be unhealthy because you're still 20 kilos overweight. And we see that a ton as well. Like you're having all the amazing, your avocados and your gluten-free breads and your eggs, but hang on, you're at 3,000 calories a day because all of this food is in excess with really high fats, even good quality. Or the second part that you can be so granular in regards to the tracking that you're missing the certain oils or the lack of fueling components of the day. So it's absolutely both. But from a association standpoint, I think this is where the mindfulness element maybe takes a bit of a turn. But an idea that I really like and you'll see this as a theme through a lot of our podcasts, is like alignment with other areas in your life. So, for example, if you really pride yourself with the work you do or the business you run or the project you're on, etc., there's probably going to be a certain metric or set of metrics that you follow in that space, right? So that there's a how long did the project take to complete? What was the ad spend behind it? What was X, Y, and Z? There's 5 or 6 key metrics, for example, and you're going to use those on a semi-regular basis to say, am I on track or off track? And there's all these activities that I need to do in between those periods of time that either get that number further or closer to my goal. The number certainly doesn't change without me doing something. And I think being able to at least have that similar relationship to your health in regards to weight is one of those metrics among others that I'm going to check. There's never one number that means, this project fails or succeeds. It's just one among many. And also that number doesn't change unless I'm doing certain things in my week. And I think just being able to, for me personally, that whole run your body like a business becomes a nice way to both remove a level of emotional attachment to what the number means, while also reinforce the nature of the link between other numbers. So
Mm.
if I just look at weight by itself, it doesn't tell me very much. Muscle, body fat is not considered, recovery capacity, all of these other aspects. But if I'm looking at weight alongside sleep quality, alongside some sort of energy or digestive metric that I've got, and maybe training frequency or whatever it might be, it starts to become a much clearer picture of what number is my actually focusing on, right? Because just standing on the scales every day, ironically, as you mentioned before, will actually make you more aware of things. But it's usually that secondary response being a stress response around the things you haven't done that you're now getting stressed about. So where do I start there? There's alignment of factors between if you are not happy with where you are in the progress of a project. You've got certain actions that you can speed up, slow down, or simply look at further, but it tends to come hopefully with a bit more of a logical perception of what those next steps are I need to take. Unfortunately, with weight, because it is so personal to us and there's all these identities and attachments to it, we ultimately just make it so much harder for ourselves because it then becomes an identity crisis, not a number that went the wrong way, right? And I think if we get that right, it helps a lot.
Yeah, I agree. I think we maybe loaded up with too much emotional weight, but we
Mm-hmm.
only track one number. So
Yeah.
we jump on the scales, we attach an emotion to whatever the scale says, and then we leave it at that and don't actually do anything about it. Whereas if we actually tracked more metrics, cool, not just scale weight, but how's your energy, how's your strength, how's your fitness, how's your sleep, how's all of the different things that feed into the quality of your life alongside the scale weight, and be a little bit less emotional about it. These are just numbers telling us what's going on, and we have the opportunity to change them. Maybe the scale weight has gone up, but I'm feeling better and I'm moving better and I'm sleeping better, and this is actually important for me right now. So that's what it is, sort of thing. Like, I think we can get too myopic in our tracking, where we track too little, and we lose the context of it in the whole of what the actual goal is, right?
Yeah, and I think people that progress in areas are usually ones that continue to develop their interest more and more in a particular area, right? So if you're trying to lose weight, it's not just going to be about learning everything you know about thermodynamics of how to perfectly structure your nutrition in isolation. You're going to have to look at sleep and hormonal understandings and digestion and training, etc., to really find a more full picture. And I think even to go, push on that step around the difference between a logical project at work versus your health is that, ironically, if you stress about a number at work, it certainly has an impact on your physical health, but your performance of your business you can kind of still follow through with. Whereas if you do the same thing but in a higher stress state, you just make everything harder, right? You're naturally going to have a higher cortisol level. You're naturally going to not use carbohydrates as well. All of this stuff that actually makes that number harder to move. So there absolutely is a very measurable difference on your physical state if your mental state has changed.
And I think this is to highlight the tracking further. Like, we're obviously talking about food tracking a lot here, but this is where sleep tracking or recovery tracking or those other things can become super helpful too, because our body doesn't work independently. Like, what if we're working on something with our health and we're tracking metrics there, our work and all the things that we're doing there is going to have an impact on that anyway. So maybe the point is, we need to track some other metrics too, like start tracking sleep and recovery for a little bit and see what good feels like, so that you can then know how to bring in the things that are going to allow that to continue and keep building you up.
Yeah. So let's go back to some of these numbers, right? Because the one thing, there's two things we've really highlighted here. One is track the numbers so you're actually honest with yourself, because the mindfulness is an amazing additional pursuit, but in isolation, you're still missing any sort of tangible number to get clear on where you're at. And the second part is this, not the judgment, but the learning from those numbers. So it gives us a bit of an indicator, but it has to be alongside other indicators as well. So we've talked about food. The kind of big four that we tend to address, I would I'm quite a fan of a fifth one I'll add in here too, but we'll look at food in regards to tracking photos, in regards to actually just literally photos, not calories, of the quantity and quality of those meals over what sort of period of time, how I'm feeling on those meals. Adding those notes around how I'm feeling is always helpful. The second one would be sleep, and I do think that a high quality sleep tracker, something like the Whoop and the Aura, we're a huge fan of, does allow you to just develop more of an understanding of what are the things I'm doing before bed and what drastic differences that make towards sleep. An obvious example would be if you have one or two drinks before you go to bed, alcoholic drinks, how much that can impact your sleep in a very real way. Macros then becomes more of a deep dive into more the logistics of what are the breakdowns of protein, carbs, fats, because we're a huge fan of both the timing and quality of those macro splits rather than just total calories. I can guarantee that how you feel on 50% carbs and 10% protein compared to 40% protein and maybe 30% fat, you're going to notice that you're significantly more stable with your mood and energy throughout the day in most cases than fueling on very refined carbohydrates. So the quality of those carbohydrates, even if ironically, if you're on 1,000 calories of Pop Tarts, most of you will still drop body fat for a period of time, but you'll just feel horrendous in that process, right? And it definitely, how quickly you bounce back afterwards, again, is what we care about. Even if you lose 10, I want to know where you're at in 6 months and that you maintain that. So this whole calories in, calories out discussion is obviously a part of the discussion, but there's a well-being and quality of life we need to address as well. And I think that's where tracking macros is such a huge part of that. You mentioned this before, but steps. So just not actually the exercise itself, but your total just movement throughout the day is always going to be an area that as we get older, as we get into more and more sort of work scenarios that are sedentary, though that's always going to have to be something that's quite a conscious combat that we need to look at. And then if I was going to throw a fifth one in there, before I add mine, what would your fifth one be? We've got food, sleep, and then deeper sort of macros steps. What would your fifth one be?
Maybe strength progression.
Yeah, interesting. Because there's kind of three others. I was going to look at recovery score, so HRV more specifically, but overall, like how well am I recovering to the exercise I'm doing? Because that can at least consider, depending on the type of training you're doing, how much is aerobic, how much strength. But again, so important to make sure that if I did a big leg workout yesterday and my recovery score is really low, it doesn't mean that my leg workout was a bad idea. I need to look at my average overall. So I do find that HRV is good, but strength score is beautiful. And certainly as we age becomes a really important metric, because if you're really, really fit, but you're starting to get weaker, that's a pretty good indicator that we need to change tack a little bit and maintain some muscle mass. Or even largely, this is a little bit more nuanced. Maybe this is sixth or seventh down the list, but one of the key parts I keep from a blood work standpoint, we could probably pull out another 5 key markers here, but just that blood sugar balance, that insulin control is also such a huge one as well.
Yes, yeah, I had forgotten about that. There's so many things you can track.
100 things. Yeah,
yeah, track everything.
Yeah.
And I think the strength one probably does top. No, I know it's really hard to put them in an order, right? But there's good science that there's certain strength metrics that are correlated with better health outcomes in the long term, and things that are quite easy to track too, like grip strength and ability to hold your own body weight and those sorts of things. Like you don't need to track them every day, but to test them, once a month or every couple of months, I think is worthwhile.
Yeah, I agree. I've circled through those in my head a little bit, because in the short term, HRV can be kind of a nice metric over 2 or 3 months if you're making some positive changes and shifting some weight. But I've certainly noticed that where I haven't looked after myself I've lost some muscle mass and I've got weaker, but because I'm lighter, my HRV is actually quite high. That seems
Mm,
less accurate. So okay, I'll agree with you. Let's go strength metric and having some sort of key markers in place that, certainly if we're looking at this not just over weeks or months, but we're looking at it over years, like 100% strength metric should be tracked. And that
mm.
might be worthwhile asking, guys, if you're listening to this. Are you tracking a metric? Is there a particular deadlift or squat or what would be another one, pull up, for example, like some of those more compound sort of honesty lifts where you're getting clear on am I getting weaker as I get older? Am I really doing something more intentional to stay strong? And that's going to have an impact on all sorts of things downstream. And if you're going to stay, you're not just, that's not going to just be going to the gym. That is going to be a fueling and addressing gut health and all of these sort of health markers to make sure it's not just really achy joints and things, which, sore either injuries or achy joints is a huge limitation for a lot of us staying strong, not because of the weight training, but some of these other things we might not be addressing.
Mm. Yeah, I think it was you sent me something about this recently, Ollie, but about um a guy being able to hold his own body weight for a minute and a woman like 75% of for a minute.
Hmm.
Like that
That
being
was
as
like
a
more of a grip strength, but it requires that shoulder
yeah.
stability, core, etc. as well. Yeah.
It does, and a certain amount of endurance even to
Yeah.
hold like a minute's a long time when you're carrying holding something heavy.
Yeah.
So yeah, and it's the easiest one to test, right? You pick up a couple of dumbbells and see how long you can last with.
Yeah, and I must say, hanging from a bar, as
Yes.
simple as it sounds, is probably one of my favorite shoulder health exercises these days, right? Like you can look at your scapular control and your external rotation and internal rotation exercises, but simply that motion of really allowing that capsule to kind of be held under traction is such a nice way to sort of open things up in a range that you don't typically, go into day to day. So, you don't even have to do the full pull up. You definitely get benefit from simply hanging from that bar. So, kind of a nice addition. Now, I've got a nice little topic you brought up that I want to tackle in a second. But before we do, what we're sort of the overall concept that I really want to get across today is this idea of awareness first. Track something so that you can really be honest with yourself of what that marker truly is, because you might be like, I'm generally having 1,600 calories a day. Turns out it's 2,000. So getting clear on really recalibrating your expectations to what that number actually is can be very helpful. But then, secondly, there's this attitude component to it of like, how often am I really getting clear of this priority actually being number one or number two, rather than continuing to get kicked till sixth, of my mental as much as my physical health, where I'm taking that pause, where I'm looking after myself, where I'm intentionally going for a walk, breaking up the day, that sort of stuff. That isn't just about setting an alarm on your phone and ignoring it 10 times. It's about actually looking forward to going for that walk because you know you'll feel better in the afternoon. In the food example, you can track food day and night. But if you're not looking for a little bit of hunger here or to go for an extra walk or to move that body, you always find that you just feel a bit sluggish and a little bit behind because there is such an attitude aspect to this that's going to make a big difference in your overall intention and therefore action with the results you're getting.
Mhm. If you're looking for what, are you looking for ways to cheat or are you looking for ways to go a little bit more? I think is
Mm,
an interesting one
yeah.
because a lot of us, we think we should do something, shooting all over the place, right? You
Yep.
should do something, but you don't necessarily want to do something. So generally, we'll look for ways to do as little as possible or cheat on ourselves.
Yep.
Well, be aware of that. But when we're really in the flow and we're really getting that kind of engagement with the thing that's important to us, we'll find ourselves looking for how we can do more, how we can seek that little bit of extra edge.
Yep.
And you're in a good spot when you find yourself doing that. And I think it's a good thing to celebrate, right? You find yourself doing that, you're like, this is the first time I've done this. This is so cool.
Yep. Yep. Or you've got it back, right? This is sometimes if you've
Mm.
been in an athlete in the past or you've been into sports and you kind of get that driver back, you know what it feels like when you get it back. So yeah, there's a 10% variation in all of these outcomes if you set a tracking metric, and if you're looking for the hack versus looking for a way to succeed, that 10% turns out to be a 20% variation from good to bad, or from moving forward to not. Um, that 20% is pretty much the whole picture, right? So I think it's worth looking at. Now, you've kind of already alluded to it, but I think it's worthwhile finishing on this point, which is this idea of rules versus boundaries, right? So tell me more. What does that mean?
Yeah, I had a conversation with some of our mastery clients about this recently. Is a lot of us have grown up with rules, and this is where the tracking can be a little bit not inflammatory. It can be a little bit triggering for some people because it feels very ruley, like
Yeah.
this is something that you have to do.
Yeah.
But the difference here is that rules are an external thing that someone placed on you. You must follow this. You must do this. There's no engagement from yourself in the fact that you want to do it or anything like that. Where a boundary is a line where you find for yourself of knowing, when I do this, I feel better. Therefore, it's not restrictive to me. And an example would be like for me hitting my protein target. Some people would look at that and say, well, that's a rule and it's restrictive, whatever. But for me, it isn't. It's a boundary that I know when I hold that line, I feel 10, 20, 30% better than if I don't do it. So it's worthwhile doing it for me. And
Yeah.
I think tracking is a way of you discovering your edges, find your boundaries, find those things that you need to protect, and then protect them and feel awesome. And you don't feel restricted in doing that because it's not a rule that someone else has placed on you. It's an edge that you've found for yourself that you know is important for you.
Yeah. And it's funny because some of those can start as an external boundary, right? In regards to, I'd
Yeah,
like you to
maybe.
eat 2 grams per kilo of body weight. And you're like, oh, okay, I'll give it a go. You do it for a couple of weeks and you're like, actually, I feel significantly more energetic. I don't get as many cravings. I like this. I'm going to make this an internal target that I'm hitting now, right? And I think sometimes that transition can be a big part of this attitude aspect of, I'm
Mm.
not doing it because my coach told me to. My coach told me to do this. I did it. I felt really good, and I want to keep doing it.
Yeah,
Is
yeah,
just
yeah.
like such a subtle but also rather large change in process.
It is, yeah. Well, it's the thing that's going to keep you going for longer too, eh? Because we're only going
Yeah.
to follow someone else's rules for a certain amount of time before we can't be bothered anymore.
Yep. Yep. And I think this is just a nice little reminder of be careful not to be flipping the triangle upside down, right? Like if you're obsessing over the cold showers and the 3 different supplements that are going to magically change your life, but you're not taking into account your relationship with food, your relationship with the scales, and your relationship with getting strong or moving the body, then you kind of got everything up around the wrong way. And I think when you can make sure that there's 2 or 3 key principles in your day that you protect, maybe you have more, but that's all I can focus on, and you're able to just lock those in because they are your North Stars of what, well, you can't have 3 North Stars, but sort of your intentions of
Golden doors.
feeling great. Yeah. Well, we can make it 4. Make it, the is it Union Jack? No.
Southern
What is
Cross.
it? Southern
Something
Cross.
like
That's the
that.
one. Geez, the British in me there. I've a Union Jack exercise is the one I'm putting up later today. So that's what's in my mind. Great little shoulder exercise I'm quite enjoying, but complete
I
tangent.
do not know what that is.
Yeah, well, I'm sure it's an exercise, but I had to make up for a name for it, and it was a pattern of the Union Jack, so that was great. But
Oh, brilliant.
Southern Cross is
Right.
what we're thinking of. So there's probably 4, but essentially looking at those kind of key anchors that you have in your day. And if it's like, for us, it's always been, where's my protein coming from? Uh, is my energy stable and did I sleep well or whatever it might be, right? And if I've kind of got those 3 metrics in place, I can sprinkle in a couple of not so great components and still have a great day because I've got those internal boundaries of I know that if I hit this, I'm still on track. And I think that's a really nice way to wrap up this shift from tracking stuff to then this sort of internal attitude of feeling like you're in the right space, right? So yeah, let's leave that there. Mandy's 6 weeks into your cut now.
More like 12.
Nice. Okay, cool. So we're learning lots of stuff. I think we might have to do a little recap episode on Mandy's first official cut as part of an intentional body composition shift. You've done many other experiments, but this is a very much more locked in fat loss phase for good old Bali. So that might be its own episode before we get into it, or maybe post Bali. Let's see how we go.
Yeah.
But for now, hopefully wherever you're at, what you're tracking, whether it be more exercise or food related right now, bring some awareness to what you're tracking. If you're tracking nothing, there's probably one of those you can pick out. If you're tracking everything and you're finding ways to cheat, well, there's probably more of an attitude discussion to have, and then start to think about what are those ones that are most meaningful to me, because when I hit them, I feel significantly better. You get those right, you're in a beautiful spot, and more importantly, you'll make it last long term.